can the Rockets, because this ultimately is the question, can the Rockets beat the Warriors this season?
This team has taken a gigantic step back. You know, one of the reasons why Houston was able to play with Golden State, one of the reasons why Daryl Morey built that team the way he did, was he gave them a physical defensive presence. Luka Mbamute, Trevor Ariza, those are not just bad losses, those are critical losses for them. The idea that Carmelo Anthony can somehow step in for Trevor Ariza and do what he did is just silly. Ariza is a great two-way player. Carmelo Anthony plays no defense. They'll get Clint Capella signed. They still have P.J. Tucker, but this is not a team that challenges Golden State in 2018-19 the way they did this past season.
What are you talking about? I mean, you look at that Rockets team, they won 65 games last year. 65 games. And their record with James Harden, Chris Paul, and Clint Capella was off the charts. And I'll tell you guys another thing. Mike D'Antoni, the coach of that team, knows what he's doing. A lot of Laker fans got down on Mike. I was around him every day for 2 years when he coached that team. D'Antoni, with his kind of system, is going to be a 60-plus win team every year. The Rockets, remember, were up on the Warriors 3-2 when they lost Chris Paul. I'm one of many people who thinks had Chris Paul played, the Rockets might have gone to the NBA Finals, Neek, and I'm not down on the Rockets. Yeah. If you look at Carmelo Anthony, offensively, he's identical to Ariza. And I think any team with James Harden, Chris Paul, and Clint Capella, with Mike D'Antoni as the coach, is a threat to go back to the finals.
I want to agree with you because I'm a Carmelo fan. I'm from Baltimore. He's from Baltimore. He's been a great player. However, it's hard for me to listen to your argument that D'Antoni is going to figure it out when D'Antoni was with Carmelo and they were not able to figure it out when Carmelo was the centerpiece of that team. I'm not sure that it's
but he won't be the centerpiece of this team.
But I'm not sure that Carmelo knows that necessarily. Carmelo, which is fine. I like Carmelo to have that confidence, but if your best argument is that he is essentially going to replace Trevor Ariza's points, then you have to lose what Trevor Ariza does on the defensive end, and that is hard for me. The one argument I could make for them making it even further is that Chris Paul will have to carry a lighter load. And Chris Paul is getting older, and they were obviously a much better team when Chris Paul was playing and healthy than they were when he was injured. So the argument that they might get better and that Carmelo might make them better is that this will allow Chris Paul to take a few more quarters off, a few more minutes off, and play at a little less aggressive pace and allow him to be around for the final games of the Western Conference Finals.
You cannot out-Warrior the Warriors. The reason why they were up 3-2 in that series was they played defense. Look at the way Magic Johnson is rebuilding the Los Angeles Lakers. He is looking for physical, tough-minded, defensive-oriented players.
You can out-Warrior them if you don't miss 27 threes.
Yeah, how much has Mike D'Antoni stressed defense since he's been in the
How much has Daryl Morey built that team to be able to defend Golden State?
I think you're making my point.
To be able to build up, to bully up Golden State.
They have an elite GM. Arguably the best GM in the league. They have an elite coach. They have the league MVP. And as Dominique pointed out, they have Chris Paul, one of the best guys ever to play the point. Now, I'm not arguing that they're going to win 65 games again. I think that's a really high bar to set.
Who cares about 65 games?
What I am arguing is they could
against the Warriors.
They could beat the Warriors. And think about the Warriors, guys. 2 years in a row, the Warriors have been down late in a playoff series. Klay Thompson pulled them out of the fire 2 years ago. And this year, they got the Chris Paul injury to help them out. Neek, the Warriors are not invincible. Everybody thinks they are, but they were down 3-2 and a Chris Paul injury away from being absolutely down for a standing 8, and they pulled it out of the fire. I think Houston can get them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most ironic thing about this conversation is to some degree we're asking Carmelo to admit that he is not quite as good a player as those other guys.
Well, that's interesting.
While we're all sitting here talking about basketball as if we know it better than Cassidy. Like, I feel like Cassidy's input is more important.
Okay, but
Neek, I know you're my boy. I appreciate that.
No,
I mean,
true.
You guys are well versed on this. I will say though, we talked about Carmelo Anthony fitting in with his team. Let's not forget, Carmelo Anthony is not a catch and shoot player. He is a dribble off the ball. number one option in the past. That's his mindset. Not only will he fall to the third best player on this team, you could argue that it may be the fourth best player if you put Eric Gordon in the mix, because Eric Gordon was better than Carmelo in about every single metric last season. So it's back to our conversation about in the NBA, when we had about the Celtics, the number one priority is managing egos. And what we saw last year, Carmelo Anthony's face on the bench is going to be an issue.
Okay, you said the Warriors are not invincible. Who's going to win the NBA championship?
The Warriors. But I'm telling you,
there's
cracks in that. And Cass, think about this last year, because you and I were living it every day. When the idea of James Harden and Chris Paul was first broached, nobody thought it would work.
Right.
Everybody said they both need the ball. It worked to the tune of 65 wins. What makes you think they can't figure Carmelo out?
Well,
because Carmelo and CP have a different relationship too, and James Harden's still number one option. Sorry, Neek.
No, you're fine. But the way that they do play is still, I think, a lot of isolation. And what the point that I'm making, and while I'm kind of on the fence, I'm arguing against both sides. The positive point is Carmelo is very capable of isolation basketball. And if he wants to do more isolation and take some from Chris Paul, that allows Chris Paul to be healthier later. But the tough thing about Carmelo isolation is you need to pass out. When they come to double team, you need to pass to the open shooter. And I'm not sure Carmelo has shown, he obviously has the ability, but I'm not sure he's shown the willingness to do that. So if he does that, and if he can catch and shoot when he is in there with Chris Paul and James Harden the way that he does for Team USA, I think he'll be a great addition.
If they ask Carmelo to come off the bench, will he do it? That's another question we haven't approached.
He won't. He won't.
You guys don't think he will?
Said it himself.
He said.
He just said it.
He just said, I've been playing it for a long time, the game that is. When I feel like I'm ready to take that role, then I'll take that role. Only I know when it's best for me to take that role.
That's a little dangerous, that quote right there.
But the other question is, will Carmelo suddenly start to defend? No.
I mean, I think it's too late. It's too late now.
No,
and I think that is the major strike against him.